The United States government just announced the Trump accounts, where they're going to contribute $1,000 to every newborn's account, tax deferred, in the name of capitalism. But they're just printing money out of thin air.
Here's how the accounts work. For every U.S. citizen born after December 31st, 2024, before January 1st, 2029, the federal government will make a one-time contribution of $1,000 into a tax-deferred account that will track the overall stock market.
Today, we're going to uncover what that actually means and how this is nothing new. They're printing money out of thin air, they're picking winners and losers, and inevitably, when you have more debt than your GDP growth, well, there's collapse. I'm on the road right now, but we're still going to bring you some alpha. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Let's go.
In 2012, you'd need 30,000 Bitcoin to buy this house. A decade later, it had only cost you 20 Bitcoin. And today, it could be yours for 5. If home prices keep falling in Bitcoin, why do they keep rising in dollars?
I wonder why Coinbase keeps coming out with commercials like these. Well, it's because, unfortunately, unaffordability is a common experience in America. People are working more, earning less, having less spending power. And the main culprit of this is inflation of the money supply. And when the money supply is inflated, all goods, services, and products downstream are also inflated. It's pretty simple. Here's a great video from Bitcoin Teddy that shows us just how dumb the government thinks we actually are about the effects of inflation on our economy.
For the general public, for those working families of people, why 2%? Why is getting it to 2% so important?
So that has become the globally agreed, essentially all major central banks target 2% inflation in one form or another.
How does that help my Nevada families? How does that help people in Nevada?
I'll tell you how it does. And it's I guess it's obviously not, it's not obvious how that is, but what 2% inflation, to have people believe that inflation is going to go back to 2% really anchors inflation there, because the evidence is and the modern belief is that people's expectations about inflation actually have an effect on inflation. If you expect inflation to go up 5%, then it will. If everyone kind of expects that, because that's what businesses and households will be expecting, and it'll kind of happen because they expect it. So
the printing of money is corrupting the very fabric of society as a whole. Some people are praising the new Trump account plan, where they're going to contribute $1,000 to every newborn after 2024 to 2029 in a tax-deferred account, which they call private property. But let's call it what it really is: money printing.
Here's how the accounts work. For every U.S. citizen born after December 31st, 2024, before January 1st, 2029, the federal government will make a one-time contribution of $1,000 into a tax-deferred account that will track the overall stock market. In other words, it'll be pegged to an index that we'll pick. Right, Michael? We'll pick it. We'll pick a good one. Maybe you should be the index. I'd like to have that. These kids would be very wealthy if that were the case. That would be a good idea. I think we might do that, Michael Dell. These accounts will be private property controlled by the child's guardians, and in many cases, those guardians will be the parents. We think probably the parents will be the guardians. They'll be open for additional private contributions each year from family, friends, parents, employers, churches, private foundations, and more. This is a pro-family initiative that will help millions of Americans harness the strength of our economy to lift up the next generation, and they'll really be getting a big jump on life, especially if we get a little bit lucky with some of the numbers and the economies into the future. In addition to the substantial financial benefits of investing early in life, extensive research shows that children with savings accounts are more likely to graduate high school and college, buy a home, start a business, and are less likely to be incarcerated. Trump accounts will contribute to the lifelong success of millions of newborn babies. They are fully, and this will be very interesting, I think, for everybody to hear, they are fully funded through targeted reforms in the One Big Beautiful Bill, like the $1.7 trillion in mandatory savings, welfare reforms to stop waste and fraud, a 3.5% remittance tax, and more.
Okay, couple problems with this. Question number one, where's the money coming from? Question number two, if it's going to be going into the S&P 500, well then aren't they just continuing to exacerbate the high prices and high valuations that we have on these companies already? Or if it's not going to go in the index itself, well, it means that it's going to have to be custodied with a certain bank or provider or custodian, meaning that the rich, the bankers, are going to continue to get richer. They're going to earn fees now on that money and in perpetuity. They're going to start to lend out that $1,000 that was created out of thin air and do what we all know as fractional reserve banking. But this inevitably leads to the same outcome that we've seen everywhere in the world. In one of the greatest podcast intros ever, Larry Lepard is doing a series with Cypherpunked, where they're going through the big print, episode by episode. Here, he talks about the impacts of what happens when deer are allowed to run free with no consequences.
During World War II, we had men stationed on some islands outside of Alaska, and they were there to keep an eye on the Russians, basically. And they were resupplied. They were on a remote island, and they were resupplied by boats. Somebody realized that maybe if the weather was bad, the boats wouldn't get there, and the resupply wouldn't occur, and so they'd run out of food. And so somebody else said, well, let's put some reindeer on the island. The reindeer will reproduce, and if the boats are unable to get there with the food, the soldiers can slaughter the reindeer and eat the reindeer meat. And that was fine, and the war ended, and we left. And at the time, there were a couple hundred reindeer hanging around, and the reindeer didn't have any natural predators. There were no wolves or anything to kill them. And what they did was they ate the moss and the lichen that grew on the island, and that kept them alive. Well, over time, they reproduced, as reindeer will, and the number of reindeer grew steadily from starting at 22 up to 6,000 reindeer in the early 1960s. And then at that point in time, the food that was there just did not support the reindeer that were there, and they had a very bad winter, and a lot of the lichen got covered up, and they all died. Within the space of a year, the head count went from 6,000 reindeer to 42 reindeer.
It's a sad story.
It's a very sad story for the reindeer, obviously, but the point being that what happened there is they outstripped their resources. They outgrew their resources. And, if the reindeer had productivity-enhancing developments where they could have grown lichen artificially inside of greenhouses and so on.
Of course.
They might have been able to support 12,000 reindeer, who knows? But they reached the point at which the carrying capacity exceeded the system. And that's the point. If you take Keynesianism to its natural extension of just growth at any cost, eventually you're going to outgrow your ability to supply yourself. And in fact, it actually applies to debt, Stein's law, which says that if something can't go on forever, it will end. And what's been going on forever is that debt has been growing, and it's been growing at a faster rate than GDP. And the GDP, when you take on debt, you have to pay interest, and then in theory you pay the principal back or you roll it over. The GDP is what you use to do that with, because you have to earn money to pay the interest. And if the GDP does not grow at the same rate that the debt grows at, eventually you outstrip your ability to pay the interest. And the debt either fails, or you need to heavily inflate the GDP in order to catch up. If something cannot go on forever, it will end.
The thing that we all need in this society right now is sound money. And if you have sound money versus corrupted money, well, wouldn't you want to hold on to that and sell the corrupted money? Well, you can do that exactly by working with Ledn, the leader in Bitcoin-backed loans, which allows you to unlock liquidity in your Bitcoin without selling your Bitcoin. Ledn has issued over $9 billion worth of loans to tens of thousands of customers since 2018, and have done so in a fast, simple, and transparent manner, which is why they have over 1,000 five-star customer reviews and have never lost a single cent or sat of customer money. Loans start at just 12.4%, but for the people that go to learn.ledn.io/simply, well, you can get 0.25% off your first loan. The other thing about Bitcoin and how it's different from other stocks or other things is that you don't have to trust anyone. You can trust yourself and you can trust the protocol. But how you do that confidently, intelligently, privately, and securely, well, that's a whole nother matter entirely. Which is why we partner with the Bitcoin Way, which will help you to protect your generational wealth the right way. Remove it completely from the system, but you can have confidence that your keys and your Bitcoin are actually there. Schedule a free 30-minute consultation with their team, and they'll walk you through how to do this step by step so that you're prepared when the eventual rug pull on the banking system happens. Go to thebitcoinway.com/simplybitcoin. So going back to the Trump account idea, what if $1,000 wasn't just invested into the S&P 500, but a small portion of that went into not just the Mag 7, but the beautiful 8?
You have something in your terminology, the beautiful 8. What does that mean for Bitcoin investors?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why Bitcoin could actually reach $300,000 a coin is given the fact that everybody has exposure to the Magnificent Seven, right? So that Apple, Microsoft, Google, they have 1 to 2% of their portfolios in that. One great way to diversify your Magnificent Seven exposure, which is a high concentration in equity portfolios, is to make it into the Beautiful Eight. Add Bitcoin exposure. And so I'm the portfolio manager of two products, Biddy and Baggy ETFs. And what those do is actually monetize Bitcoin's volatility. So we see Bitcoin is volatile today. It's historically has been volatile. We sell calls yet on a weekly basis, and you can get 5% upside. So we think you could take your Mag 7 and make it into a Beautiful 8 portfolio, because it has, traditionally Bitcoin has participated when NASDAQ 100 has run up and has had some correlation. Now it's decoupled at times, but you've already got volatility with the Magnificent Seven. Why not diversify that into the Beautiful 8? And it's not subject to tariffs. It's not subject to corporate earnings. It's an uncorrelated, idiosyncratic type of asset that could turn that Mag 7 into a Beautiful 8, and you can monetize it by selling calls or getting access via Biddy or Baggy ETFs.
I see.
Bitcoin is an uncorrelated, idiosyncratic asset class that is separate and opposite of all of these, so meaning that they zig when the others zag. And this is good for your portfolio, but this is also good for your sovereignty. BlackRock has been saying this for the last 2 years, and it's why the IBIT ETF has reached $70 billion in assets, which is the fastest ever, far outpacing gold. Their team believes that this is just the beginning.
When it comes to the adoption by wealth advisors, I'm curious how far along you think we are in that. Are we in the early innings? Are we in the middle innings? Are we, I don't think we're in the 8th or 9th inning, but, where would you put it at?
Very early. I think that what we've seen is a concerted effort by most of the largest firms to progress through their diligence and their research and their approval process.
And we do too. Bitcoin is superior not just to gold and ETF flows, but in every single way of the asset class entirely. It will become the dominant store of value for the 21st century, and every other financial asset will be correlated to Bitcoin, like gravity.
I see a world where there are many types of assets, but the king apex asset, the root asset, which everything else is settled on or everything else is oriented to, the center of gravity of the financial universe of the 21st century emerging is Bitcoin. Just like, that falls toward the center of gravity, which is the middle of the earth, and none of you have been there. That doesn't mean that it doesn't control everybody, right? Everything will be oriented in a frame of reference.
Whenever you see a headline about a Trump account and these sorts of things where there's new stimulus or new money being created, don't just think about the positive things. Think about the detrimental things. Why you're working harder. Why these houses cost more. What's going to happen when all of this new money enters into the system? Well, that means that Americans and their family and their children are going to have more spending power for fewer and fewer goods, meaning that the prices of all of these things will continue to increase. It's the same game over and over again. But what happens eventually is that when you continue to create more debt than your growth in GDP, like Larry Lepard said earlier in the episode, well, the outcomes are inevitable. It happens in every financial system, in every currency since the beginning of time. Bitcoin is outside of the system, and the winners and losers of the system aren't picked. They get to voluntarily opt in and choose whether they want to win or not. The winners in the Bitcoin system are just addresses, and I hope one of those addresses is yours. One of the ways that you can continue to invest in your Bitcoin journey is by learning about all of the facets of Bitcoin, not just Lightning and payments, maybe at a Stake and Shake or a store of value in macroeconomy, but the Bitcoin mining network. How does it work? How does it protect the Bitcoin protocol? How are we adding new blocks to the blockchain? How do these machines work? What about the supply chain? What about the pool centralization? All of these things you can learn and more at the Mining Disrupt Conference in Dallas, Texas from November 11th through November 13th. Get 20% off your tickets by using the promo code SimplyBitcoin. Thanks for hanging out with me on the road. Till next time, this is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Happy stacking.